Excellent. Welcome to the Society of Concerned Reeves Battle Game Reeving class part 2 of number to be determined here, where today we're going to be going over how as a reeve to help make your smith's designs become a reality. Now, what the heck does that even mean, you ask? Well, you see, every time we're playing a battle game in Amtgard, there has to be a battle game to play. Your local smiths are the people that are designing these games and making them come to life. You might even just be using a simple game like one of the ones found in the ROP, or you might be reeving something that's a bit more complicated on like a day battlefield, or on a kingdom field, or even an interkingdom field at some point. So how exactly do you work on making these games happen? Some of the most important things to keep in mind as you're reeving any battle game are going to be the basic rules of the game. If you don't know the basic rules of the game, you can't A, teach the game to the people walking onto the field, and B, you can't correct people on the rules of the game as the game is going on. On top of all of the things we covered last time, where you have to keep in mind general field safety and class abilities in general, you have to keep in mind the rules of the game itself. So we're going to start with something super simple, which is capture the flag, which this is actually in the ROP on page 20. 2 or more teams compete to secure a flag at their base in order to score points. First team to 3 points wins. The flag is considered a game object. This game is fun to play in the woods or other areas with interesting terrain. Teams, 2+. Lives, unlimited. Respawn, instant at base. Players, 5+ per team. The objective of the game? Bring the game flag to your base and hold it there for 5 seconds in order to score a point. Once a point is scored, all teams reset to their bases. Refresh, every 45 minutes of playtime. Types best supported all. So I just read all that out, but what the heck does that mean? Let's break it down. When you're looking at a battle game write-up, it's going to start with the name of said game. In this case, capture the flag. A brief introduction to how the game works and where it is best to be played. And then we're going to start breaking down the meat of the game. How many teams need to be in this game? In this game, 2+. So that means you could play it with at minimum 2, or you could have more. It's basically like the suggested number of players on a board game on the side of the box. So that's always important to keep in mind based on, what type of field you're playing on, whether there's only 10 people or whether there's like 20 or 30. The amount of lives, unlimited. So that just says how many times people can respawn. Differs from other games such as Castle Defense, where the attackers would have unlimited lives, meanwhile the defenders might have a limited life pool. But for games like Capture the Flag that are just kind of simple, easy to pick up, unlimited lives. The respawn timer. How long does it take someone to respawn once they die? You can respawn instantly at base. In certain game modes, that might increase or decrease. So, for example, this says best types of games supported, such as whether it's ditch rules, militia rules, or class rules. So if something is like ditch or militia rules, instant at base is normally good, because there's no abilities that are going to be bringing people back to life. When there is class involved, there are abilities that'll either like freeze people for 60 seconds or 30 seconds. There are things that will let people resurrect each other, other ways of cheating death or locking down your opponents, so you have to be more conscious of how long your respawn timer might be. If it's a class game, typically you want it to be at least 30 seconds, so that way things such as Ice Ball and Resurrect have meaningful impact on the game. Because realistically, if it's instant respawn, if someone hits me with an ice ball, why would I be stuck for 60 seconds when I can just say, I'd rather die and go back to my spawn and respawn? So having that in there is very important. Now, for the amount of players needed, 5+ players per team. That's very important for pretty much every game because sometimes a game will work really well with like 10 people or 10 to 20 people. But above that, maybe it gets too cluttered, maybe it gets too complicated. Or maybe there's a minimum, like you can't run like Capture the Flag with only 2 people. Realistically, if there's only 2 people, you're probably not going to be playing any battle games anyways. It's important to keep in mind the minimum amount of players that you can have, or potentially a maximum. Then the game designer will have the objective for the game. What does each team have to do to win? In this case, it's bring the game flag to your base, hold it there for 5 seconds, score a point. For this, it says the first team to 3 points wins. So you would keep in mind, like, this is what I need to emphasize to the players, this is how you win. Refresh typically is advised to only happen at most every like 30 minutes of playtime. That's when you get your big heavy-hitting spells back. There shouldn't be a refresh every time like a point is scored. Because otherwise, like, everyone's spell list is going to be full of all the most powerful refresh abilities because they know the second round's over, they're going to get them all back. It's also important to tell people ahead of time, especially if you're going to be playing a game like a castle defense that might take upwards of 30 to 40 minutes. It's important to tell people, hey, you're not going to get a refresh when we swap sides. So when you're making your spell list for attack and defense, you will go through that for each half, and then maybe there will be a refresh after one attack and one defense round. And then, of course, types best supported, whether it's intended to be played in ditch style, militia style, or class. Now I hear you ask, what is the difference between like a ditch style, a militia style, or a class? Game type. Ditch, no classes, no armor, no projectile, no siege, shields are unbreakable. Militia, no classes, armor's used, projectiles are used, shields are breakable. Full class, no magic, all classes except for magic users. Full class uses every class. Or there might be this lovely little other category where it might be rules for like jugging, orc ball, phoenix league, etc. So as you're reeving this game for capture the flag, it's going to be quite simple. You're going to be looking at a flag, you're going to be looking at 2 teams' bases. Realistically speaking, you'd probably only need like 2 reeves for this game, just so there's people watching the field, making sure everyone's being safe. And so that way, when someone runs away with the flag, you can make sure, A, all right, did they get hit on their way there? If they got hit and then they run a couple steps, telling them like, hey, you got to put the flag back. Like you died 5 feet back, so go put the flag 5 feet back and then go to respawn. Or just making sure people are like, counting an appropriate amount of time, not going like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but actually doing their 1 amped guard, 2 amped guard. Or if it's class, you might need an extra reeve just to keep an eye on people using their abilities properly. Obviously, depending on how many people you have playing in general. This is like looking at a simpler game. Making this game come to life as a reeve is a lot easier. But then there might be times where people add in like an extra thing to make the game slightly more complicated, bringing it to like maybe a difficulty of like 3 out of 10 instead of 1 out of 10. Let's say there's 2 flags, and you have to have both flags at your base to win. There's extra game objectives to keep an eye on. It's important to keep in mind when there's like class games, like rules with insubstantial. Insubstantial, player may not physically interact with game items, objectives, or other players unless specified by the ability that made them insubstantial, other than retrieving equipment. That's important. Let's say someone decides they want to use blink. They blink, they vanish from sight. I can't stop being insubstantial within 10 feet of an enemy, so you're going to want to keep that in mind. But also, I can't go, all right, I vanish from sight, grab the flag, and start walking away. Because while you're insubstantial, you can't interact with game objects unless your ability says otherwise, and Blink does not say otherwise. So you would not be able to just cheese capture the flag by going, all right, I'm going to grab the flag, vanish from sight, and walk back to my base, yay. So of course, those are important things to keep in mind. As you move into more complicated games, that's where being a reeve that is supporting the game designer and that game coming to life is a lot more important. For example, like a very lightly, slightly more complicated game might be capture the flag, but you add in a monster. So let's say there's the 2 flag rule, where you have to have both flags at your base to win. We're adding in a monster. It's like a giant worm. This worm is immune to everything, and they have a tongue that is a great weapon, and it has siege. What the heck does siege mean? Siege means if it touches you or any part of your body, it's basically engulfing, you die. Siege is very, very silly. How does that relate with capture the flag? Well, let's say there's a giant worm on the field that's immune to everything and it touches them and they explode. If someone's carrying the flag and the worm touches their flag and they don't necessarily notice, maybe, or they get hit in the leg and that person forgets that siege means I die instantly and I poof into a fine red mist of death. It's important to remind the players of these new things that are getting factored into the game as the complexity of the game increases. As you're adding in more bells and whistles to a game that make it more complicated for players, you have to also have more reeves that are there to explain the new mechanics to players, or at least to remind players of specific rules as situations come up. Does anyone have any questions so far?
What about bespoke mechanics that aren't necessarily mentioned or like explicitly stated in the ROP?
Bespoke mechanics? Question mark?
So bespoke mechanic being like something that is mentioned as an effect on an item or a character that is normally either reoccurring or something that would be used throughout an event. So like for instance, let's say we're using capture the flag, but the bespoke mechanic is that holding the flag makes you fragile. So fragile is a state stated by the ROP, but connecting fragile to a game object isn't. One of those things that we probably want to keep an eye on, especially as a reeve, is to make sure that when you're asking your games designers, is there something special I need to worry about? The worm with the great weapon, is there like a programming guide that it has? Is it attracted to loud noises? Is it attracted to the flag? Is it attracted to armored fighters? Is there like some sort of gimmick or mechanic I have to worry about? Same idea with game objects. Does the game object make you slow? Does the game object make you fragile? Can you cast with with the game object as if you had an open hand? This is something that your game designer, as the game designer, you need to be telling your Reeves. And as a Reeve, you should be asking your game designer, because this is really important, because if there is an intention that is made with how fast the game needs to play or specific feel to how a game should play, knowing bespoke mechanics that are made for that game should be kept in mind.
We're going to look at a sample game and look at all the things that it has to where, as a Reeve, you're going to be keeping an eye out for. Because when you're looking at a battle game write-up, you have to understand what objectives and what things you're going to have to look for that are more crucial to the game to keep it flowing. So this one's called King of Nothing. It's a King of the Hill type game, which is, I'm taking control of this area, get me off of it, smile. It has a respawn time, 60, rolling death count. So this is not necessarily a term you see all the time. So this is when you would ask your smith, what do you mean by rolling death count? Is it like there's a chime every 60 seconds, when the chime goes off they respawn? Or is it just you count to 60, boom, that's it? So that would be something to ask your game designer, of course. And also this adds materials needed. So awesome, as a Reeve you might be helping them set up the field. Do you have the materials to actually run the game in the first place? So then you'll have a description of the game. Teams will need to get their flag into the castle and on the ramparts to fly it up there for as long as possible. Players will have their designated side of the castle to bring the flag to, and say the incantation, I raise this flag 5. So that means, cool, to raise my flag, I have to say, I raise this flag 5 times. Upon doing so, the effect of the flag is removed, and the team begins to count a timer so long as the flag is up and waving. The opposing player may come to the platform where the flag is placed and say the incantation to the NPC, I tear down this flag 5. So cool, if I'm taking down my enemy team's flag, then you hear, I tear down this flag 5. So the first thing you might note as a Reeve is, when someone goes to interact with where the flag is being raised, I need to hear this incantation 5 times. You might actually just have a Reeve that's in that general area where the flag is at to keep people honorable and to keep an eye out for making sure people are using the mechanic properly. Once they say I tear down this flag 5 times, this will remove the flag and have it reset to the original team's base if it is an enemy flag. The team with the longer time will be the victor and will be the defending team for the ensuing siege. So this leads into whatever game happens next that day. This also mentions like the flag must be held in an open hand. Awesome. This is definitely a question that a player's gonna ask. So for like current rules, I can't have like a medium shield in my hand and then also be holding the flag. I have to have an empty hand and grab the flag to be able to move it, and it imparts several effects. Cool. Player functions as a spawn point for their team. Players may not resurrect within 10 feet of a living enemy player. Generally speaking, most of this game revolves around the flags themselves, so you're gonna want a Reeve probably near each team's flag, and the center point in the middle where people are hoisting up their flag. All players in contact with the team's flag benefit from the effect Song of Power. Cool, so this is one of those bespoke mechanics we were talking about. So if we look at Song of Power, because as a Reeve, looking at this game, we're gonna know, alright, people are gonna ask what the heck Song of Power means. Song of Power cuts your incantation time in half, which is also rounded down. So if someone's incantation to recharge a spell is normally charge 5, becomes charge 2. If it's normally charge 10, it becomes charge 5. So that will be something important to keep in mind to clarify to players as they're interacting with the flag. The bearer of this flag may cast as if they had an open hand while wielding the flag. So basically, the flag functions as like a glorified magic staff. So if you wanted to simplify that to players, you might explain it like that. It's a flag that effectively gives you an alternative respawn point and Song of Power. It's a really fancy staff. So then some other notes. Any player from any team may take down a flag, even their own. If a flag is left on the ground for too long, 30 seconds, it will be reset to its team's nirvana. Scoring only occurs so long as the flag is held by the NPC on the rampart, and they may not be harmed or targeted in any way. So what's nice is this game does give additional clarifications. For example, like earlier when it said if an enemy team takes down the flag, it goes immediately to that team's base. An ally player can remove the flag so they don't have to risk it going all the way back to their base, or so they can use the effects of it again, since once it's counted for scoring points, it no longer gives you Song of Power. So your team can use that strategically if they wanted to. If it's left on the ground, it goes back to spawn. So that answers that question right away of, do I need a Reeve on each flag? Yes, because you're going to have a Reeve counting that timer of 30 seconds. And once it's been sitting there for 30 seconds, they'll have to bring it back to that team's spawn. Scoring only occurs so long as the flag is held by the NPC and they can't be harmed or targeted. In that case, you might want to give that NPC a notifier that says, don't hit me, whether that's giving them another reeve staff or reeve sash, giving them a pink sash, which is commonly used, at least in Neverwinter, as a don't hit me sign, or giving them some other denotation and also making sure it is clear to every player, do not swing on this player. They are an NPC, they are not an enemy, they are not an ally, don't interact with them, just hand them your flag. There might be some other questions that players might have, like for example, if we go back to capture the flag, I might look at this and say, all right, cool, how many teams are there supposed to be? Realistically, it doesn't say there's a cap or a minimum, but it's assumed like probably 2+. The amount of lives, or whether this is a class or militia game, also not listed, but that's something to clarify with your game designer beforehand, and also like the frequency of refreshes. But keeping these things in mind, you're going to be able to see how many reeves you might need for a game. So for this one, you need around 4. One reeve that's on each flag, one reeve that's watching the area where the NPC is, and another one just floating around to make sure people are being safe, using incantations properly, asking other questions, etc., or answering other questions, etc. So does anyone have any questions about this one? Excellent, excellent. I'm going to take the crickets as a good sign that no one has any questions. Cool, awesome. All in all, with like making the games themselves come to life, the most important part you're going to be looking at typically is the objective itself, because realistically this is where the most confusion is likely going to happen. People will always be confused about how many lives they have, like what their respawn is, but those are things that typically don't change drastically between games. It's like, cool, do we have unlimited lives or do we have a set number? That is something that most Amtgard players are used to, unless they're brand new, of course. They might need extra explaining, but that's fine. That's what we're here for. Looking over, making sure people are respawning like appropriately, waiting the appropriate amount of time. If you notice someone who's like kind of just walking up to spawn or respawning in like 5 seconds when your respawn timer is supposed to be 30 seconds from base, correct them and let them know if they do it again, they're dead, but for a minute maybe. But the objectives where most people are going to get confused, because a lot of the setup of the game and the players per team, making the teams themselves, setting up the field, etc. Most of that will be up to the game designer. You will kind of be there to help them set up the field if you'd like, or also just to make sure there's no hazards on the field, make sure people's equipment is safe as it comes onto the field. However, when that game is going, you're probably going to be watching an objective. So making sure people are operating with game objects properly is very important. That's pretty much where like half of the confusion for being on a battlefield comes from. The other half is from people not understanding either their own abilities, the enemy team's abilities, or just generally what's going on around them. In terms of making the Smith's plan come to life, that's where most of your work's going to be done. Of course, before a game, you're going to want to do your pre-game meeting with your reeves, like how you do before a tournament. But before a battle game, you're also going to want to include the game designer and the game runner in that conversation. But realistically, they should probably be leading that conversation, because they're going to be telling you, this is what I am envisioning for this game. This is where I will need reeves the most. And then obviously this would be a good time to give in feedback. Like let's say they're running a capture the flag game and there's the 2 flags and they go, oh, I only need 1 reeve for this game. That's when you could go, well, maybe not just 1, because you're going to have to be watching possibly 2 flags at once. Also, realistically, if you're reeving a big field, it is always better to have at least 2 reeves, because if you're at your local park and there's like 15 people on the field, you can't watch all 15 of those people at once, and you can't watch both sides of the field. You do not have 360 vision, so it is very helpful to go, hey, no, I'm going to help you out, because the more reeves we have, the safer things will be going, but also we got to communicate beforehand. When there's these big, potentially 60v60 games, that's when it's really important to get your reeves together before the game and make sure everyone knows what their responsibility is, what objective they're looking at, what area they're going to be in, etc. Because odds are, if you are in the middle of this 60v60 game, it's probably on a really big field at like an Insert Kingdom event, you're not going to be able to easily run over to your other reeve to ask them a question mid-game. It will be difficult. And then as you're running over to ask your head reeve a question, there's now an area of the field that isn't getting watched anymore. And these pre-game conversations, especially for these long games, are going to be really, really important. It will make the reeving process so much smoother. And that's also going to be a good time for you to give input. Like, for example, if someone's like, oh yeah, we're going to be doing a militia game, such as Capture the Flag, but the respawn time is going to be like 30 seconds at base. My feedback, it's a little long. If you want to have a respawn time where deaths are more impactful, maybe bring it down to like 5 or 10 seconds. It still gives people a good buffer time. It's still impactful when you die, but it's not, I'm going to sit here and just lose the round because my team wiped and now no one is alive to do anything. It's also when you will get the good chance to like make sure there are other essential things set up on your battlefield, for example, like in these big 60v60 games, like, hey, have we set up a hydration station nearby? That's something that's going to be very important, especially on a kingdom field. It's also really helpful just to know what you're looking for, because there will be games where things will get confusing. In this one, something that someone who's never used Song of Power before might find confusing is, how does Song of Power work? Does it just charge my stuff for free? Do I only have to say my incant once? Or, can't resurrect within 10 feet of a living player? If I am holding my team's flag and getting that respawn effect, and then someone from the enemy team walks up to me and someone respawns on top of me and kills them, obviously something went wrong there, because they can't spawn on me if I'm within 10 feet of a living enemy. Those are times when, as a Reeve, you're going to be there to clarify. And that's going to be a common mistake, because it's a couple of different rules on one object.
The big thing is just understanding communication. The big thing for field Reeves, especially if you're not the smith, is to make sure that everybody is on the same page, everyone knows what's going on. One of the things that sometimes will happen is that one Reeve will say rolling death count, which Leo got correct. It was the idea that it's a singular timer that'll go off every 60 seconds and all players at Nirvana will respawn. Some people will hear that, and some Reeves will say, oh, well, it's 60 second from death, or it's 60 second from base, or 60 second rolling, or wingman spawns. Whatever other thing that you did not say, that is one thing that absolutely torpedoes games often, because people will hear one thing and then do something completely different, and it'll cause complete issues of like tempo. So like a defender's team having a way shorter respawn than they ought to, and it just kind of creates a mess. As a field Reeve, don't feel like that the smith's word is law. Sometimes there are just things that a smith might create that may not necessarily be conducive to like a proper reeving experience. Sometimes things can be just too hard to actually reeve. The best do it all the fucking time. It is not something that, don't feel scared. Don't feel like you can't speak your mind on it. So like, for instance, in this game here, originally it was a 60-second static cooldown at base. And I was speaking to one of the individuals who was helping me run games for that event, and they stated that the place where this normally runs had an issue with individuals counting their respawns way quicker, or it ended up being a little bit more problematic. We ended up agreeing and saying, okay, rolling count works fine. Other forms of situations where that can happen would be like, if we know that the kingdom that we are playing with, or the group of people that you are playing with, may not understand how Song of Power works, or who may not know how Heart of the Swarm works, because that's where the respawn mechanic comes from, then you may have to curtail it. Explain to the Reeve, hey, I don't think it's going to really work out to give them Song of Power. Maybe there's not enough casters on the field, or giving them the rolling or the respawn point might cause an issue. What can we do to recompense that? But the big reason you want that is for individuals to have communication between both their smiths and their battle game Reeves. So, kind of keep an eye out when you're reading this kind of stuff. I implore you to read the games that you're going to be reading, just so you understand what you're looking at, and don't just go off of the first explanation head Reeve or the smith tells you, because it makes things harder. Other than that, and this one is more for the smith side of things, but Reeves, you should also keep an eye on it when you're reading stuff. Leo, could you please raise the slide just a little bit? So when you look at respawn time, and you also look at the general way that a game is scored, one thing you want to keep an eye on, this is something that Sir Porkchop taught me a very long time ago at this point, is that if an objective takes too long to accomplish when compared to the respawn point, then it drags down the tempo of the game. So for instance, let's say that this is a game of capture the flag, standard capture the flag. If that respawn point isn't instant and instead is 30 seconds from death, that means that game's tempo becomes way quicker, because you only have to resolve a single team fight, win said single team fight, take the flag and run it straight over, hold it there for 5 seconds to win. So keep an eye out on what the respawn time is and the amount of interaction a player needs to take to win the game. Not asking you to become like a smith on yourselves and kind of figure this stuff out, but it's something to keep an eye on, because it means it will tell you normally how much or how active you're going to end up having to be. So for instance, weird mechanics on flags means you're going to have to be pretty active. Is it an objective where you have to worry about a person? So like VIP, assassination, anything of that sort. Does that mean I have to be more active or passive? Am I going to want to reeve holding the respawn point and keeping an eye out for attrition? So like life count, or whether or not if a specific person is trying to respawn. Is it like the VIP? Those are the things you want to keep an eye out on. So go through your write-ups, make sure that everything is clear to you, because if it's not clear to you and you're the person reading it, it's definitely not going to be clear to the person playing it who's only going off of it from what they're hearing.
If he has a reeve who has no idea what's going on, how does he like that reeve to speak up and go, Cid, I don't know, what's this about, have that conversation, especially before a game starts, because I know sometimes people that are just starting out as reeves get kind of inside their heads and worked up about that.
So, like, as a reeve, especially if you are brand new to reeving battle games, in my opinion, one of the most important things to do when you're walking up to your game designer is asking specifically what they need from you. Because let's say you're walking up to a tournament, it's pretty clear what the roles are. There's one person maybe running the line, maybe two people reeving an individual ring, a scorekeeper at each ring. The rules are a lot more clear. When there's a battle game, the objectives might be different in every single game. There might be life pools to be kept track of. There might be a lot of moving gears. One of the most important things to do at the beginning is, if you're reeving, asking the game designer, what role do you want me to have? What do you need me to do? Because that's honestly the hardest part, figuring out what exactly your job is. Once you find out what your job is on the field, then all of your other questions can go from there. So if, let's say, this is a game where each team has a life pool of 50. Each team basically only gets 50 respawns until they can't respawn anymore. Or at least they can't respawn anymore at base. That's when I ask my game designer, hey, what is my job? Your job is going to be keeping track of Team A's life pool. Now my questions might go, what do I have to keep track of? Because you might not know the words, okay, how many lives does each team have, respawn timers, etc., especially if you're brand new. So then your game designer should break this down as simply as possible. Team A has 50 lives. When someone respawns after being at Nirvana for 30 seconds, they fist bump you, they respawn and they are alive, and then you remove a life from their life pool. Your instructions at that point are simple. It's when someone comes up, you wait till hear them count to 30, they fist bump you, they come back to life, you tick down a life from their life pool. If you're like reeving an objective, if they say, I want you to watch this capture point that needs to get counted up to 50, then you might ask the question, is it a consecutive 50 or a cumulative 50? Your game designer might go, you're going to have a cumulative life count of 50. That means that if the team is counting on this objective and the blue team has counted to 15 on this point, the next time they go to count, it'll start from 15. It won't reset back to 0. Versus a consecutive where the reeve would go, they have to try to get the count all the way up to 30. If they die, even if it's at 29, it resets to 0, and they have to start all over, getting it back to 30. The questions you're asking your game designer should really start with, what role do you want me to have? What do you want me to do? What position do you want me in? So that way, when you get put in your spot, let's say you're just a field reeve who's watching for people using their abilities properly, then you know what your responsibilities are. And if maybe you don't feel comfortable enough doing the field reeving and you'd rather just reeve an objective, verbalize it. Let them know, hey, I'm still new to reeving. I don't feel comfortable field reeving on my own. I'd rather either shadow someone in the process of doing that, or I'd rather watch an objective and keep tally of points, because that's something I'm more comfortable doing. And it's a role that has to get done anyways. In that case, your game designer should be working with you and figuring out how they can either give you the tools to succeed or what they can do to make you feel most prepared for whatever position you're going to be in.
One thing that we've been striving to do a little bit more is that on the Smith side, you want to do a read through with your reeves. If you're not personally assigning them to a position, it's like saying, hey, I need you to watch this side of the field and do this. Hey, I need you to watch respawns. And if it's something that's a little bit more complicated, I'll explain exactly what they need to do to the letter, and I'll have them kind of read back to me, hey, you kind of have an idea of where I'm asking you to do, right? And they'll either give me the yes or no. On the reeve side, you hit it perfectly. What do you need me to do? What can I do to make sure that I'm doing this right? One common one is that with attrition games, a lot of people forget to give their reeves the life counter. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a little people checker. They normally use them for baseball teams to check pitch counts. You do the same thing with attrition. You click them up every time the condition for respawn is met, whether it be fist bumping, walking through a gate, etc., etc., etc. However you want to talk attrition. You always want to be communicative, and you want to make sure that the whole gang is on the same page. If you're the Reeve, if you don't understand something, ask. There are no bad or stupid questions, only questions that don't get to the bottom of the actual question itself. The big thing is focus on making sure that you know what you need to worry about. And one thing I do tell some Reeves, because some of them, like especially the younger ones and the newer ones, they'll kind of like get a little overzealous. So like if, for instance, I have someone who's watching a caster or watching the objective, and they'll go and they'll start trying to make calls on the field, that, oh boy. Understand that while yes, your word is law to an extent, your words have impact. And depending on what you choose to do, and you need to understand how much you can do, that may cause an issue with play stoppage. If, for instance, I have a set person working on flags, that person working on that flag now needs to understand that if they call a hold and that flag needs to move a significant distance, like for instance, player A is enchanted with Iron Skin and attempts to pick up the flag and run, is being chased by player B, and player C in this situation casts Dispel Magic on player A. As player B makes contact to the newly dispelled player, killing them. If you call a hold and say that that flag, that, player A is now dead, flag needs to return to a set spot, and now there needs to be some level of resetting the field, how much that's going to change the outcome of a game. Is this significant enough that it has to warrant a hold? If yes, be clear about where that's going to end up, where your other Reeves need to be, and to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page. So if that flag has to go back a good 30 to 40 yards, you've now radically changed the game state of the game, and may have made this game almost impossible to reeve and reset to a reasonable point, and that's where you want to be. That's your sweet spot. Making sure that any stoppage of play can be easily rectified and go back to neutral with relative ease. Sometimes it's just going to happen. Sometimes a player sloughs a play or does something so beyond the pale that you have to bring several people back, have them reset several points of armor, and an objective has to go back the full way. If it is that far and it tweaks a round, and it's a round-based game, maybe reset the round and start it over. But the idea here is talk to your fellow Reeves, talk to the Smith, make sure everybody's on the same page before you go and make big, impactful calls, and always be reading. And that's the other big thing.
Thank you for watching the Society of Concerned Reeves Battle Game Reeving Lesson 2. Stay tuned for more content on how to play everyone's favorite LARP, Ibgard. Keep yapping!